All right, everybody. So, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Yesterday, so we're still on this portion of Surah Al-An'am. Okay. And yesterday we did actually comment on وَمِنْ آبَائِهِمْ وَذُرِّيَّاتِهِمْ وَإِخْوَانِهِمْ وَاجْتَبَيْنَهُم. But here's one thing. I was actually going over the word وَوَهَبْنَا. Okay. It's quite interesting when you look at وَوَهَبْنَا and that whole issue of hiba and all the different ayat that relate to al-hiba and what it basically is relating to in the different ayat. And it was interesting to see that most of the ayat that talked about hiba, hold on, what is hiba again? So we said hiba actually means to give something without anything in return. So you're basically giving a gift, you're basically not exchanging something, but you're giving something, okay, as something from your own kindness, from your own hospitality, from your own affection, whatever, all of that, that you're giving this gift and not waiting for something in return. And here's one thing is that when you look at the ayat in the Quran, the ayat in the Quran mainly emphasized that hiba, or we're speaking about the whole part about giving a gift, is mainly focused on children, that children are a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why you could see that the hiba, or at least for the prophets, it was talking about that the prophets were given a gift, and that was in relationship to the children. So even when you talk about Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam making the dua, Rabbi habili min as-salihin, Ya Allah, grant me from the salihin. And at the same time, you look at the other dua, Rabbi la tadharni farda wa anta khayrul warithin. Ya Allah, do not make me single. And here, when you look at Prophet Zachariah's dua, Rabbi la tadharni fardan, don't make me single. The word fard actually means and can mean an odd number. It can also mean single. وأنت خير الوارثين, because you are the best of the ones to basically inherit or give in abundance, etc. So when you look at that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then answered the dua for Prophet Zachariah and gave him basically Yahya. Okay. Same thing when you look at, for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answering the dua of Prophet Ibrahim in the ayah in Surah Al-Safat, فَبَشَّرْنَاهُ بِغُلَامٍ حَلِيمٍ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when the malaika had come, and then they basically came in, and what did Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam do? He right away rushed to serve them from that uh, that goat that he had prepared. And then that's when the malaika فأوجس منهم خيفة قالوا لا تخف قالوا لا تخف. And then what was it? He was worried that, okay, something is behind these people. Why are they not eating? But then it wasn't until he realized that they told him that they are from the messengers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is malaika. And then that's when فَبَشَّرْنَاهُ بِغُلَامٍ حَلِيمٍ. That's when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given him the news through these angels that he was going to get a son that is Halim. I think I said Alim last time. Halim. What is the difference between Halim and Alim? Alim means he's all knowledgeable. But I was actually talking about Halim. What is Al-Hilm? Al-Hilm is forbearance. What is forbearance? Forbearance is despite the ability to retaliate, but you choose to give in and you choose to let go. Even though others had harmed you, or others probably had wronged you in different ways, but you had chosen to let go despite the fact that you're capable of retaliating or probably inflicting, even if it is an equal amount of pain on that person, but you choose to basically not retaliate and not harm the other person. So فَبَشَّرْنَاهُ, but here's the thing. When it said فَبَشَّرْنَاهُ بِغُلَامٍ حَلِيمٍ, that was talking about not Prophet Ismail. That was actually talking about Prophet Ishaq. What's the evidence? Well, the evidence is that the story was about Sarah, and then when she heard all of this, she basically said, "Ajuzun aqim." Was she talking about herself as being a barren woman, or was she referring to her husband being barren and old, and that too old to get any children? So you might think, well, it's women that get too old after menopause, but even older men, their ability to have the sperm count and all of that is actually reduced compared to the younger men. So even older men go through something similar to the menopause. Regardless, okay? فَبَشَّرْنَاهُ بِغُلَامٍ حَلِيمٍ, okay? Is that the ayah when he had made the dua, Rabbi habili, Ya Allah, grant me. That's when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responded, فَبَشَّرْنَاهُ بِغُلَامٍ حَلِيمٍ. And certainly, Zakaria alayhi salam, Rabbi habili, look at that word, habli min ladunka dhurriyatan tayyibah, innaka sami'u ad-du'a. Ya Allah, grant me a dhurriya, or offspring that is good. Innaka sami'u ad-du'a. And same thing, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in response to that dua, فَاسْتَجَبْنَا لَهُ وَوَهَبْنَا. Here's that hiba again. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had answered his dua and given him Prophet Yahya, وَوَهَبْنَا لَهُ Yahya, as in Surah Al-Anbiya. In regards to Prophet Ibrahim and Ismail and Ishaq, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had said, وَوَهَبْنَا لَهُ إِسْحَاقَ وَيَعْقُوبَ كُلًّا هَدَيْنَا. Now, in general, we do see ayat that speak about the different grants. That's the word. Maybe grant is a better translation for the word hiba than a gift. Because when you're talking about a grant, it's something that you would give. But a gift, I don't know, maybe I should see which would be a better translation, gift or grant. Okay. In regards to the different grants in the Quran, there are different ayat. One is speaking about hiba in regards to prophethood and knowledge. وَلَقَدْ آتَيْنَا دَاوُودَ وَسُلَيْمَانَ عِلْمًا. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala given Prophet Dawood and Sulaiman the knowledge. So therefore, il-hiba, or the grant here, is the knowledge and prophethood. There's also the grant of kingdom. Kingdom? Are we talking about authority here? Yes. فَفَهَمْنَاهَا سُلَيْمَانَ وَكُلًّا آتَيْنَا حُكْمًا وَعِلْمًا. So therefore, the hiba of understanding and the hiba of power. And certainly from the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, رَبَّنَا لَا تُزِغْ قُلُوبَنَا بَعْدَ إِذْ هَدَيْتَنَا وَهَبْ لَنَا مِن لَدُنْكَ رَحْمَةً إِنَّكَ أَنْتَ الْوَهَّابُ. Making the dua, Ya Allah, do not let our hearts go astray after you had guided us, and grant us the mercy from you, for you are the one to be giving the most. Well, the one, al-Wahhab, is the one that grants without asking anything in return. Okay, so now just an idea about al-Wahhab. But let's go back to Tafseer al-Qurtubi. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then we talked about وَمِن ذُرِّيَّتِهِمْ مِنْ آبَائِهِمْ وَذُرِّيَّاتِهِمْ وَإِخْوَانِهِمْ وَاجْتَبَيْنَاهُمْ وَهَدَيْنَاهُمْ إِلَى صِرَاطٍ مُسْتَقِيمٍ. And we talked about وَاجْتَبَيْنَاهُم. But then we left off أُولَئِكَ الَّذِينَ هَدَى اللَّهُ فَبِهُدَاهُ مُقْتَدِهِ. And we talked about the demonstrative pronouns, أُولَئِكَ, ذَلِكَ, and we talked about those ones, and that it was to basically reflect a certain paradigm, a certain a certain system that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created in this world. By the way, when we speak about system, when you look at children in their early stage of development, they're learning the different names of things. Apple, banana, me, myself, mama, baba, they're just learning the identification of things. Once they grow older, a little bit older, so we're talking about, later, then they start learning the function of things, what their hands do, how to touch, and of course, anything that they would find in front of them, the first thing is that they would put it in their mouth because that's how they recognize themselves first, through their mouth. And their relationship to the world is really through their mouth. That's why they would just put it in their mouth to sense it, to taste it, to feel it, to recognize their world around them. They first recognize it through their mouth. And then, of course, they would recognize the function. When they get a little bit older, at age 5, they start realizing that mother is not capable of knowing all the information about me, and that I can actually make a lie. I can make a lie, not say the truth, but then, of course, gets caught and then learns that I just have to be slicker in order to not get caught. And then they start learning different ways of being sneaky. Then of course, with this piece of it, of course, then they learn not only the function of how the system works, but then when they get older, they start learning about interests and about their own interest and others' interests. And of course, the part about personal interest, it actually started all the way when they were younger. This is mine. This is yours. My territory, your territory. And then, of course, certainly this recognition of self, recognition of that. What am I trying to get to? I'm trying to get to that when the ayat would emphasize a different system, this different system that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had created, whether we're speaking about the psychology of men, psychology of women, or whether we're speaking about social, let's say, responsibilities, the distribution, what each and every single one was created for, how we understand our roles, how we distribute our roles, how we consider our goals and the achievements and what matters, and how we also differentiate between a goal and a tool, and how we understand ourselves as human beings in relationship with the rest of the world. And the reason why we're looking at that is basically it's a level of maturity. Just as children mature in their relationship with the world, first they learn the names of things, then they learn the function of things, then they learn the dynamic in how it plays out in their life and their relationship. And then later on, they learn how to set a certain relationship and how to make it feed and serve their interests. Islam basically tells you need to mature in your understanding about yourself and about the world around you, and about the dynamic of how things function based on how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the reality of world. This is important. How Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the reality, because your relationship with the reality is not something that you would create based on your terms, but no, the terms are already there. You have to know the terms, you have to know the system, you have to know the dynamic that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created this world in. And Sharia is all about putting you into this maturity to recognize the system that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created this world in. That's the whole thing. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created this whole world in a certain system. You are given this insight through the Quran and Sunnah to recognize and learn about the system. So when you look at ulaika, dhalika, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us see the system that we may not live long enough to realize and may not live long enough to even or even be mature enough to recognize, realize, understand, or even have the ability in terms of intelligence to even see it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us know with the word tilka, with those demonstrative pronouns, to let us know that there are certain laws in this universe that you may not realize how they function, but then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you that there are different behaviors, there are different things that may make a force in your life and a force in the future, which could have actually happened in the past. So in order, for example, when somebody proposes for a girl, what do? We basically want to study the history of that person. Why? Because that's our only window to knowing about their future. That's the only window. So we would need to say, how committed are they in their school? How committed are they in keeping a job? How committed are they with their relationships? How respectful, how disciplined were they in their life? The discipline that you demonstrate in the different corners of life is going to later on tell me the trajectory of where this is and what this is going to look like in another corner, in another chapter in your life. And that's the same way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us know that what you contribute today as a believer is not going to only have an effect on your life, but is going to have an effect on many generations to come. So therefore, what you contribute, in order for it to be something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would bless, would preserve, would even probably multiply, only the good contributions that are based on the vision that is aqeedah, the vision that is right, the legislation that is right, and certainly all of it going in the practice of al-anbiya, the prophets. Their practice is the only thing that's going to be considered as permanent and going to be lasting. But all the other things, they're basically going to think that it's going to last long, but then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not make it last long, because it will have in itself, let's say, the self-destruction. Keep this one in mind. You know, there are certain things, it's basically within it, it destructs itself. We see that even in the universe. There are certain molecules, they basically go through a certain thing and then it destructs itself. You know, even our bodies. Yes, it would build, and then at one point, once we die, the body would actually destruct itself. Once it dies, it destructs itself, it decomposes by destructing itself to basically going into the main organic substances or elements that it was created from. It destructs itself. Within it is basically the let's say the structure to build and deconstruct. So when you look at that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's why he was telling us that the only thing that does not get destructed, and therefore it would have this force to last even longer than your own life, وَالْعَمَلُ الصَّالِحُ يَرْفَعُ. Enough said. Everything has its own destruction within it, except وَالْعَمَلُ الصَّالِحُ يَرْفَعُ. And وَيَبْقَى وَجْهُ رَبِّكَ ذُو الْجَلَالِ وَالْإِكْرَامِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he's beyond that destruction, the system that destructs itself. Everything in this universe, it destructs itself. Builds, and then within it is the self-destruction, to rebuild and rebuild and rebuild. وَيَبْقَى وَجْهُ رَبِّكَ ذُو الْجَلَالِ وَالْإِكْرَامِ. Only the Lord Almighty is not as that. But when you look at وَالْعَمَلُ الصَّالِحُ يَرْفَعُ, that's in order to let us know that the force of good contribution, it does not have but one trajectory, which is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would elevate that person, the generations to come, and even in the akhirah, it will have the force to bring that person into elevation. You know, it's quite interesting, even when you look at things in space, even things in space, this star has a certain age, and then at one point it basically goes older, and then boom, and then it blows up. Even stars, planets, the sun basically starts losing energy, continues to lose energy until one point they're basically telling you, who knows in how many millions of years or whatever number of years they're saying, okay, that at one point it's just going to blow up and kaboof right there, because it grows and grows, and then it basically, with the same system that created things to develop is the same system that was created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that once you reach a certain age, once you reach your completion of this is it, this is the final thing that you're going to get to, that's when within you is that destruction. Except al-amal al-salih, it continues to have its effect in your life, and even after your life, and in fact even after life in the akhirah, even after life. Okay, so let's just see right here. أولئك الذين هدى الله فبهداه مقتده. So we talked about فبهداه مقتده, and we talked about the word اقتده. We said qada actually means to lead. Okay, so think of it as, you know, like a walking person. This person is leading the others. Others are following along. Okay, and these others that are following along, in order to not get off the track, they basically step on each and every single footprint that the person that was leading was walking on. So they basically take over each and every footstep in order to make sure that they don't lose track. So when you look at فَبِهُدَاهُ مُقْتَدَى, الْهُدَى, what is الْهُدَى? الْهُدَى is guidance. What is guidance? Guidance is when you're walking down a path, but you only have, of course, the farther the person is, your ability to see where they're going is going to be less and less. It's going to be less and less visible to you. Okay. So in order to find that guidance, because, okay, I have a goal, I have a destination that I want to get to, but I'm not sure how to get to that destination. That's al-huda. Al-huda, I want to get to the destination, so I use different tools to help me basically get to the destination. In order to get to the destination, I need, one, the tool first to know where I'm going, why I'm going there, and three, I need different keys to help me get to that destination. The different keys, whether we're speaking about things like a compass, things like, well, even with the compass, it's not enough to have the compass, but I need to also get to know how to use that compass. So that's why, it's quite interesting. Islam was actually telling us that compass, if you're on earth, you're not going to be capable of really knowing all the details of how you're walking down the road, because sometimes the different things on earth, you may not recognize the path. It becomes so hard to distinguish whether this is right, left, etc. So then even when you look at the Arab, they used to use the stars as a way to tell the path on earth. So what do? We look at the stars, we look at the sky in order to help us know the map of how we would continue our path to guidance. Okay. So when you look at that piece of it, وَالنَّجْمِ إِذَا هَوَى مَا ضَلَّ صَاحِبُكُمْ وَمَا غَوَى وَمَا يَنطِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَى. That's why the ayah let the Arab know the same way that you would use the stars as your map to walk on earth to get to your destination, that same way that in Najm, وَالنَّجْمِ إِذَا هَوَى, just as these falling stars, just as this star right there that you would use to help you find your way, مَا ضَلَّ صَاحِبُكُمْ وَمَا غَوَى. Your friend Muhammad ibn Abdullah sallam was not speaking of delusion and was not speaking of himself. وَمَا يَنطِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَى إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ يُوحَى. It is nothing but mere revelation from the Lord Almighty. عَلَّمَهُ شَدِيدُ الْقُوَى. What it was really wanting to tell us is that in order to find guidance, understanding about your purpose of life, how to get to that destination, you basically have to connect with al-wahi, with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and certainly that's the only way to help you know about this world, because your intelligence is limited and your ability to figure out your destination is limited if your resources are fully dependent on the things that you would find on earth. That's why you would see perhaps NASA and all of those spending a lot of money just to study space. Why are they studying space? Why study space? What do you want to get to in space? It's not like why can't we just use that money to figure out the resources on earth? And that's a lot more accessible than trying to figure out space. That's going to be a harder thing to get access to. But the amount of money that is spent in studying space is really mainly to get to the answer. Well, why and what is the reason behind creation? Why are we here? What is out there? That's the key thing. If you were to summarize all the amount that is spent on NASA and studying space, it's really that. It's really that. It's trying to understand, why are we here? What is the purpose, and what should we be living our life like? So they go and study space to understand the origin of life and all of that. How's that making people's life better? Well, they recognize that it's not going to be bringing them necessarily resources of possibly treating cancer or any of that, but they're just realizing that life and the meaning and the purpose behind life, we need resources from space to let us know and understand the beginning of life and where this is going and where we should be going. Because if we don't understand al-aqidah, the vision, and understand the meaning of life, then all our energy and our effort to understand and just live life is just going to be gone wasted. So what do? They basically go up in space and trying to figure out what is out there. Why is that there? What's happening? The age of what are we looking at in this life? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us the keys to help us answer the question and said, فَبِهُدَاهُ مُقْتَدِهِ. I want you to take al-huda. What is al-huda? What was sent in Revelation, which was sent on to the different prophets throughout history, in order for you to understand the purpose. You basically have to not only go back in history, but you also have to see the legacy to make sure that you follow the footsteps of what they had basically shown you in how to get there. It's not enough to have a vision of something, but you have to realize that there are certain footsteps, certain tools to get you to that destination. So certainly, that's why you look at amanu wa amilu salihat. Amanu, yeah, I believe in Allah. I believe in Judgment Day. That's not enough. You need the tool of amilu salihat. You need to use the tool of al-amal salih to get you to that destination. It's not enough to know about the destination. It's not enough to just have the vision of, yeah, there's Yawm al-Qiyamah, there's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yes, I know all of this. I believe that it exists. It's not enough. That's why هَدَيْنَاهُمْ إِلَى صِرَاطٍ مُسْتَقِيمٍ. Guided them to the right path. You need the tools. It's not enough to say, yeah, I've got, I know that there's that place that I need to get to. Yeah, but if you're not using the compass, if you're not walking down that path, if you're not taking those measurements, those steps, and not being consistent on getting to the path, then you're just standing in your place and just saying, yeah, I'm going to get there. But you're not even walking that step. You're not even walking that path. You're just standing in your place and just saying, Daddy, I believe it's there. Well, just believing it's there is not enough. Okay, let's continue. So when you speak about il-huda is one, guidance. Two is also knowing the purpose. And three, il-huda is also using the tool. Okay, what does that look like? We're talking about al-aqidah, amanu. We're talking about il-huda, including al-amal al-salih. Il-huda is consistency. So that's why you look at right there. ذَلِكَ هُدَى اللَّهِ يَهْدِي بِهِ مَن يَشَاءُ. What is the huda referring to? الصراط المستقيم. What is the huda referring to? Refers to the legacy. And then it continues to explain. Okay, what is the huda also? أولئك الذين آتيناهم الكتاب والحكم والنبوة. In case you didn't understand huda, here it is. It's al-kitab. It's the revelation. It's al-hukm. It's the authority. It's the legislation. It's basically the behavior that you put into practice. And it's a nubuwah, the legacy that they had basically left behind in order for you to walk the footsteps of those prophets. So therefore, when you look at the word al-huda, it's not ambiguous anymore. It basically clarified it in those ayah to tell you it's a sirat al-mustaqim. It's a sirat al-mustaqim. Your eyes should be focused on Sirat al-Mustaqim on Judgment Day, when you are going to pass that bridge over Jahannam. And at the end of that path, of that bridge, is Jannah. That's your goal. That's what you want to look at. Once your vision is centered at that, every calamity to you will be nothing, because your main calamity is not making it on a Sirat al-Mustaqim. That's why we would say, Ya Allah, don't let the fitna be in our deen. I could lose my health, I could lose my wealth, I could bear to lose my children, I could bear to lose my husband, I could bear to lose everything in dunya, but I could not bear to lose my deen, because my vision, my focus is directed at As-Sirat al-Mustaqim. Am I gonna make it there? Put it in perspective that this dunya is temporary. But As-Sirat al-Mustaqim is where I'm looking at. So I want to get to al-Hidayah, and I want to be able to pass As-Sirat al-Mustaqim. So what should I do? ذَلِكَ هُدَى اللَّهِ يَهْدِي بِهِ مَن يَشَاءُ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ. You got to be a servant to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be on that huda. So therefore, in order to let that force go past your age, go past your time, that force is وَالْعَمَلُ الصَّالِحُ يَرْفَعُ, that force of action, and nothing but that contribution in al-amal al-salih, in good action and righteousness. That's the only thing that's going to last in order to help you get empowered to cross a Sirat al-Mustaqim. So therefore, فَبِهُدَاهُ مُقْتَدِهِ. So in their guidance, and in the kitab, in al-hukum, in al-nubuwah, in getting to Sirat al-Mustaqim, that's al-huda. Take it as a step by step, and with your eyes focused on Sirat al-Mustaqim. قُلْ لَا أَسْأَلُكُمْ عَلَيْهِ أَجْرًا. There may not be a compensation in this life, but in akhirah, لَا أَسْأَلُكُمْ عَلَيْهِ أَجْرًا. I'm not asking you for a compensation. I'm not asking you for a reward. I'm basically seeking it from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا ذِكْرَى لِلْعَالَمِينَ. And this is a reminder for all the people. Now, here's one thing. It's going to be a completely different subject, but al-Qurtubi basically looks at this ayah and said that there's actually something that we would find an inspiration in this ayah that is telling us of something else to discuss. If we're talking about the word فَبِهُدَاهُ مُقْتَدِهِ, does that mean that we are seeking the actions of the previous nation / even legislation, that we would find inspiration in that in order to know the truth and consider ethics, for example? Or is this in general speaking about, well, taking the inspiration as the principle of patience, or probably living tawheed, or perhaps maybe dealing with the different, let's say, general meanings of legislation. General meanings of legislation, we're talking about obedience to Allah, we're speaking about perhaps committed to let's say, preserving nerves, preserving aql, preserving chastity, all of that, just the general terms. But the different intricate details that we don't necessarily have to follow, or do we have to follow? That's the question. So when you look at that piece of it, do we follow or do we not follow? Do we use that as evidence to understand legislation or understand ethics? Or does that necessarily not apply to us? And what would apply to us is basically what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered us to do in terms of legislation. So that's what the different scholars of usul had discussed. What is usul? Usul is basically the science that we would study. We would study one, the resources in Sharia, and basically how to apply them. How do we understand these resources? So that's basically what they studied in what is called حجية شرع من قبلنا. Is it a resource? Is it something that we could use in order to consider the different legislation of the different nations that had passed? We're not talking about Hindus. We're not talking about the shamans or the Confucius or whatever. No, we're speaking about certain legislation that we know and we have valid resources that this is something that during the time of Prophet Dawood, this is what they practiced, or during the time of Prophet Musa, or during the time of this or that prophet, this is how they practiced legislation. Can we, if we have valid resources that this was their Sharia at the time, can we adopt that within our Sharia today, or after Muhammad ibn Abdullah, adopt that as a lens to give us an inspiration and say that this is also something that we could get the inspiration for or of, and therefore we would apply it in the same way and consider that that's an evidence that this is acceptable, that this is valid, that this is ethical, that this is obligatory, sunnah, something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would recommend for us. So that's that debate. There are three different opinions in regards to this opinion, or in regards to this issue. And the first one basically said, well, it would be considered as something that we would get the inspiration for, and it would be considered as a valid evidence if we don't have anything that proves that this is to be rejected. In other words, what? They said, if we don't have any evidence that we are supposed to be basically leaving it, and that we don't have anything that objects to it in Islam, basically in Shariat ibn Abdullah, Muhammad ibn Abdullah. When I say in Islam, I'm talking about the Sharia of Muhammad. Okay, so you had majority of the Hanafi scholars, and also the Maliki, and some Shafi'i, and some Hanbalis. They said, well, if we're in general, all the different Shara'a Samawiyya, so all the different revelations, if they are divine revelations, they basically carried within them some truth, unless we have something that abrogated that piece of it. Then in that situation, we would actually consider that that is the default. Unless we have something that said, no, not anymore. This is abrogated. This is the new rule that I want you to follow. What's the evidence? Well, they said, here it is. In Surah Al-Shura, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, شَرَعَ لَكُم مِّنَ الدِّينِ مَا وَصَّى بِهِ نُوحًا وَالَّذِي أَوْحَيْنَا إِلَيْكَ وَوَصَّيْنَا بِهِ إِبْرَاهِيمَ وَمُوسَى وَعِيسَى أَنْ أَقِيمُوا الدِّينَ وَلَا تَتَفَرَّقُوا فِيهِ. They said, simple. If you look at Surah Al-Shura, for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had said, He has ordained for you the same religion which He had enjoined upon Nuh, Musa, Isa, and the word was, أَنْ أَقِيمُوا الدِّينَ وَلَا تَتَفَرَّقُوا فِيهِ. That you should basically apply ad-din, apply the revelation, apply the religion, apply, and the word ad-din would actually include legislature as well. But here's one thing. They said, but here are the certain regulations for us to apply that. And they said, number one, we got to make sure that there's something, whether in the Quran or in the Sunnah, that actually validates that this really was inspired in a legislation that was practiced on the previous nations. Okay, so we got valid resource. Number two, they said we need to make sure that there is nothing in the Shariat al-Islam that basically abrogated this ruling or probably opposed it in any way. The second opinion, they said, well, we actually think that it's not obligatory, not binding, not valid on us to basically take it as a resource whatsoever. Why not? Just like some Shafi'is had actually said, and some of the scholars of Zahiri. Wait a minute, who's that again? Zahiri, like the Abu Dawud, like Dawood Zahiri, for example. Okay. And Ibn Hazm, even though there are almost 200 and some years, between these two scholars, but Ibn Hazm was considered the main figure. Ibn Hazm, he was one of the scholars. Ibn Hazm is really quite interesting. Sometimes I don't understand Ibn Hazm, not because he was born on the same birth date as my birth date. And it's quite interesting. But anyhow, Ibn Hazm was one of those scholars that he was born in al-Andalus. Okay. But his father was a minister. He was kind of like, what today you would consider a government officer, government personnel, a person that was way up high. And if you were in the government, you definitely know the resources and you would definitely have all the different tools. So in other words, lived a very privileged life. And the most important privilege is to have special tutors that taught you fiqh, that taught you hadith, that taught you Islam, that taught you Arabi, all these different things. Basically, yeah, you've got the privilege. What's the most important privilege that you would give your son? Other than certainly knowledge. That's the most important privilege. Put them in the best school, etc. But guess what? He didn't even need to go to school. His school was actually at home. Wait a minute, what do you mean his school? He was homeschooled? Well, yes, he was homeschooled, and the homeschool teachers were generally the female slaves. Slaves were the teachers? Yes, slaves were actually a lot more educated than the women that were free. Why were they more educated? Because the more educated you are, your price goes up. So they would give education to the slaves in order to make them basically, think of it as property that you would keep and preserve and all of that. So the more educated the slave is, the more expensive they were. And certainly who's going to buy an expensive slave was going to be somebody that is an elite. So the elite, okay, who is his father, managed to buy the best of the scholar slaves, enslaved women in particular. So Ibn Hazm was one of those scholars who was many times in defense of women, but at the same time, not always. In fact, he was one of those scholars that considered that women can be prophets too. Ironically, no other scholar actually said that. I absolutely disagree with that point of view. Anyhow, but Ibn Hazm didn't just say that. Ibn Hazm was a very, maybe the word, he was a very intelligent scholar, but he was also very impulsive. Very impulsive. To the point that even in his books, you would literally see him using, let's just use the word inappropriate. Inappropriate words to swear at other scholars. You could see his anger in his writings. But this weird thing about the scholar is that despite all his anger at those that had opposed him, to the point that the government ordered to burn his books, because it was causing a lot of controversy within the society. Yet Ibn Hazm was a figure that was writing very strong books on romance. Sometimes I can't figure out this personality. How can it be extremely impulsive yet extremely sensitive to speaking about romance? And that was in his book طوق الحمامة في الألف والتألف. That book was actually translated into over 14 different languages. What is it talking about? It was talking about romance. But I must admit, in that book, the reason for his book was to warn about the dangers of romance and how it can lead to people's hearts away from akhirah, away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But I must say, I think he failed in reaching his goal, because the way he portrayed romance is something that is extremely beautiful. Yes, every single story that he had mentioned actually gets into the area that it wasn't a very happy ending and that it wasn't the right thing. But the poetry that he had put in his book and the stories and all of that, it just makes
What was the name of the book?
It was طوق الحمامة في الألف والتألف.
Okay.
And it's طوق الحمامة means the dove's necklace. A dove's necklace, there are certain doves, certain pigeons that actually have their feathers as if it's a necklace around them. It's so beautiful. Okay, we had almost 120 pigeons. Every single pigeon had a certain trait, a certain feature, whatever. So he called it طوق الحمام. But that's one little thing about Ibn Hazm. And even when he got married, he had a slave woman who was blonde, who was Hispanic in origin, at least. Let's use that one. Okay. And later, of course, in order to get married to her, he freed her and then asked for her hand in marriage. He got married to her and loved no other woman but her. And then later would write poetry speaking about, ironically, that beauty only lies in the woman that was similar to the woman that was the love of his life. Whatever. That was just a little thing about Ibn Hazm. Ladies, I can never go past Ibn Hazm. And I think Ibn Hazm was one of those scholars that many misunderstood. Certainly, in his book, al-Muhalla, you would see a great scholar, and you cannot study fiqh and just disregard Ibn Hazm's notes on fiqh or even on hadith. Only those jahil and ignorant طلاب العلم, only the ones that are ignorant, would actually just disregard Ibn Hazm as, something that we don't even need to look at. Only an ignorant talib ilm would do that. But a talib ilm that went through his ilm and went through his treasures recognizes this giant scholar, this intelligent scholar, and recognize that no, not only until you would go to his work would you really understand all the different corners for that ilm. And you really have to go through Ibn Hazm as well before you start talking about anything in regards to fiqh. Okay, so why did Ibn Hazm, although his fiqh stands on the basis that we're supposed to only look at the surface of the text and not go in detail, but I must admit, he wasn't always committed to his premise. That premise that says that we're only supposed to look at the surface of the text and not necessarily go really deep, because the second that you go really deep, you're actually putting in a lot of your own personal interpretation, and therefore it would be very subjective. That's what he said. Was he actually committed to that premise? The answer is no. He was not committed to this premise, and that many times he went deeper and way deeper than anyone else, even though part of his usul al-fiqh, which is considered as the references to studying Islamic legislature, is that he would not use analogy / qiyas. He said, we can't use qiyas because the first one to ever use qiyas and the first one to ever use analogy was Iblis. How did you get there? He said, well, yeah. He said, خلقته من نار وخلقتني من طين خلقتني من نار وخلقته من طين. He said, Iblis was the first one. He said, he used his analogy, and he said, you created me from fire, energy, and you created him from clay. That's a qiyas right there. So therefore, that's the first one that used qiyas, and therefore that's not a valid resource for us to use. All right. So what did he want to say? He said, it's never the legislature of the nations past, even if we had anything to prove it, it's never going to be a sharia that we would embrace. What's the evidence? He said, simple. لِكُلٍّ جَعَلْنَا مِنْكُمْ شِرْعَةً وَمِنْهَاجًا. He said, here it is. You look at Surah Al-Ma'idah, and it said that each of you had their own shir'ah. What is a shir'ah? Shir'ah actually means path. Shir'ah also means sharia. Sharia actually means the spring of water. Okay. The spring of water would basically, when the water comes out and the water basically starts forming a spring, that spring, that stream of water is basically sharia. Al-Minhaj is basically the path or the system that you would embrace. So they said, it said, لِكُلٍّ جَعَلْنَا, each had their own path, each had their own system, and therefore we would not necessarily use their system unless we had a separate evidence that proved, whether from Quran and Sunnah, that proved that, yes, this includes you. The third opinion said, well, we're not going to consider this opinion or that opinion. They said, we've got some details here. If we don't have anything in our Sharia that shows that this is a valid evidence or a valid system that we have to follow, then in that situation, we cannot use that as an evidence to prove it. And that you had some Shafi'i, some Hanabila basically said that. And they said, well, in general, just by having the Quran tell us that there was a piece of legislation that was obligatory on the previous nations, just because the Quran had told us that, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's an evidence that it's asking us to follow that as well. Okay, when you speak about the Sharia, so why are you even discussing all of that? Why even use that as an inspiration at all? Is it at all used and even in the books of fiqh? Yes. القصاص في القتل. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَكَتَبْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ فِيهَا أَنَّ النَّفْسَ بِالنَّفْسِ. and we had ordained upon them that basically a life is for a life. In other words, the retribution in the situation where someone is killed, then in that situation, we would basically punish that person if they had killed somebody, basically put their life as the cost, their life as basically what they're going to be paying the price for, and how they'll be paying the price. It's going to be your life. You kill somebody, we're going to put your life as the price to compensate. There we go. So when you look at that, or even bribery, why was it prohibited? Oh, well, that was also in the Sharia before. Okay, now here's one thing. This isn't just it. There were actually other evidences, and part of those other evidences is actually this story. Let's look at this story. This story was actually narrated in Sahih Muslim. What happened? So, Ukht al-Rubayya Haritha, what did she do? So she basically harmed somebody. So what happened? Well, who knows? Did she throw a rock? What did she do? She basically just broke the tooth, the front tooth, the buck tooth, that is, the front tooth of this woman. And then they went to the Prophet ﷺ and he said, al-qisas, al-qisas. Al-qisas, al-qisas, meaning that we're going to use in the same way that you harmed that other person. You basically had broken her tooth. We're going to break your tooth in the same way. That's it. Al-qisas, al-qisas. But then her mother said, "O Prophet of Allah, you're going to break her tooth too?" And the Prophet ﷺ just said, she said, "Are you going to do the same?" And she said, "Wallahi, no, you're not going to do that." Did she do it as in disrespect to the Prophet ﷺ's order? No. She just hoped that that would not happen. So the Prophet ﷺ said, "Subhanallah, Rabi'a." It's like, subhanAllah, you would actually, you know that al-qisas is in the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's fair judgment, that is. You and your daughter broke the front teeth for that young woman right there. Then the same should happen to her in order to make a fair punishment and retaliation for what she had done. But she said, "Wallahi, that's not going to happen." And here, of course, they tried to reconciliate what's the best way to figure this out. So that's when they accepted that there would be a monetary compensation. That monetary compensation, instead of breaking the other girl's teeth, said, "Well, accept the diya." A diya is a monetary compensation, whether in compensation for the loss of someone's life, or there's something called al-arsh. What is al-arsh? When it's not the complete diya, when it's a partial diya, a diya is about the price of 100 camels. Okay, that's 100 camels. We're talking about approximately $156,000. Okay. That's a complete diya. But what if we're talking about something that is partial? It didn't cost the whole life, but hey, she was walking and then she basically put her a leg, the girl falls down, her front teeth break, and of course, here it is, the dentist basically said, "Hey, we can replace the front teeth, and yeah, it would probably cost them per tooth." I know that in America it was almost costing almost $4,500 per tooth. Here in Malaysia, it would cost almost $300. Look at the difference, right? $4,000 to $300 here. Yeah. There'd be a huge difference. So then this is al-arsh. let's say you broke their tooth, let's say you probably, I don't know, broke their arm or probably harmed them physically in certain ways, then in that situation, we wouldn't say, well, you have insurance, but well, you got to pay for the cost. You got to also pay for the damage. Okay. Now, here's the thing. Is it only supposed to be a monetary compensation? Or could we say, okay, you know what? Since you had broken her teeth, and we're going to break your teeth too. We're going to take you to the dentist. I'm going to say, can you break her teeth? The same way, the amount, the same exact amount, the weight that she had broken it, or probably the hand or whatever it is. So according to the scholars that said, yes, we're going to use that as evidence, they said in the Quran, it basically said that is a tooth for a tooth, an eye for an eye, etc. We're going to do the same way. We're going to apply that same rule. For the other scholars, they said, well, let's look at this one. They said the Prophet ﷺ said, al-qisas, al-qisas, and actually used their, that is Bani Israel's evidence to prove, or their legislation, in order to say that that's something that we should adopt as well. What happened to the story? The Prophet ﷺ, when these people had accepted that they would take a monetary compensation, the Prophet ﷺ said, "Inna min ibadillahi man law aqsama ala Allahi la abarrah." That from the servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even if they were to swear by Allah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would basically implement their oath. Wait a minute. So I can swear upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and say, Wallahi, I want you to do this and this. No, this is not, it's not like that. It's not, you don't impose anything on Allah. You don't impose anything on Allah. But this is out of respect. You believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy. Ya Allah, Ya Allah, please, please, I want this person to heal, or something good happened to them or whatever. And this person is saying, Ya Allah, wallahi, wallahi, by Allah, he will heal, inshallah. Then what did they have their trust in? They had their trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But to think that you can impose on Allah, and that's only for the Salihin, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would actually accept it for them, not for random people. No, Salihin. The Prophet, the evidence. They said, well, the Prophet went to وَكَتَبْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ فِيهَا النَّفْسَ بِالنَّفْسِ, even though the ayah was really straightforward, that was an inspiration, a legislation that was put on and ordained on Bani Israel, and doesn't necessarily include us. There's nothing in the Quran that basically says that that's also our Sharia. But there was definitely an information, a piece of information that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had ordained upon Bani Israel in the Torah. But then still the Prophet ﷺ had ruled based on that. Okay. Majority of the different Malikis, the different Shafi'is, and we know they basically had considered that, yes, this is part of Islam. But like I said, some Malikis and some Shafi'is, or even Mu'tazila, they basically said, no, just like what we had read before. And there is another evidence. They basically said in Sahih al-Bukhari, okay, what happened? Al-Awam went and asked Mujahid. Who's Mujahid? Mujahid was a tabi'in. Okay. And Al-Awam was also a tabi'i, but Mujahid was actually known to be a scholar. So he said about a sajda, there's a sajda in Surah Sad. Do we actually make sujood in that? So Mujahid said, I asked Abdullah ibn Abbas. Notice, I asked Abdullah ibn Abbas. So Mujahid, why are you saying you asked Abdullah ibn Abbas? Why don't you just answer the question? Because he wants to show you that he had basically gotten the ilm from a sahabi, from a companion. So he said, I asked Abdullah ibn Abbas about the sajda in Surah Sad, and he said, the ayah says, وَمِن ذُرِّيَّتِهِ دَاوُدَ وَسُلَيْمَانَ, which is which ayah right there? وَمِن ذُرِّيَّتِهِ دَاوُدَ وَسُلَيْمَانَ وَأَيُّوبَ وَيُوسُفَ وَمُوسَى وَهَارُونَ وَكَذَلِكَ نَجْزِي الْمُحْسِنِينَ, etc. And he said, he continued to read it all the way until أُولَٰئِكَ الَّذِينَ هَدَى اللَّهُ فَبِهُدَاهُ مُقْتَدِهِ. So read all this portion in order to say, well, just as this ayah was really clear about it and said, from their dhurriya, from their offspring, all these prophets, then therefore, those are the ones that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had guided. In other words, their sharia was described as a place of guidance. So he said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had ordered Prophet Muhammad ibn Abdullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to basically take their guidance / their legislature as a place of guidance. And therefore, he said, yes, do sujood in Surah Sad. Okay, let's see. There are different qira'at though in regards to فَبِهُدَاهُ. Let's say he said, قرأ حمزة والكسائي or الكسائي اقتدي قل. So أولئك الذين هداهم الله فبهداه مقتدي قل لا أسألكم عليه أجرا. Right away. But of course, you had another scholar, he basically, Ibn Amir, he read it as اقتديه قل. So this one, not فبهداه مقتده قل لا أسألكم. No, he read it as فبهداه مقتده قل فبهداه مقتده قل قل لا أسألكم عليه أجرا. So basically, completing that one. But in Nahas, basically considered that that's فبهداه مقتده, consider that that's a form of lahn. What is al-lahn? Al-lahn actually means that this is a mistake to read it that way. Why would he consider it a mistake? He said, because whenever you would have a kasra, you don't necessarily read the last haraka. Let's say, and in that situation, iqtadih, if you were to stop at it, notice right there. أولئك الذين هدى الله فبهداه مقتده. That's the proper stop. فبهداه مقتده. What are you doing? You're basically stopping at this word right there. Majority had actually considered that no, you can continue. فبهداه مقتده قل فبهداه مقتده, another قراءة. فبهداه مقتده قل لا أسألكم عليه أجرا. Okay. Anyhow, regardless of all those different قراءات, let's say, he said بكسر الهاء اقتده قل. So فبهداه مقتده قل اقتده قل اقتده قل. You're grabbing it. That's according to another قراءة for Ibn Abbas. Okay. Now let's continue. قل لا أسألكم عليه أجرا. What is الأجر? الأجر is الجعل. What is الجعل? الجعل is a compensation. I'm not asking you for a compensation, and that's basically إلا إن هو. إلا إن هو is that, what is this إن هو? قل لا أسألكم عليه أجرا إن هو إلا ذكرى للعالمين. In هو, that it is. It, the pronoun it is referring to what? Is referring to the Quran. إلا ذكرى للعالمين is a reminder for all the people. What is a reminder? Is this referring to the Quran, or is it referring to it-tawheed, or is this referring to the legacy that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala / tawheed and legislature and all of that was sent on to all the prophets, or is this referring in huwa illa dhikra lil alamin to the Quran alone? وَمَا قَدَرُ اللَّهَ حَقَّ قَدْرِهِ إذ قالوا ما أنزل الله على بشر من شيء قل من أنزل الكتاب الذي جاء به موسى نورا وهدى للناس تجعلونه قراطيس تبدونها وتخفون كثيرا وعلمتم ما لم تعلموا أنتم ولا آباؤكم قل الله ثم ذرهم في خوضهم يلعبون. It's quite interesting. When you look at this ayah right there, what was it saying? They had not considered the true consideration for the Lord Almighty. And what? إذ قالوا, when they had said that the Lord Almighty had not revealed anything. And say, who revealed the book, who revealed the revelation that is? And then what happened? Just give me a second. إذ قالوا ما أنزل الله على بشر من شيء. When they had claimed that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had not revealed anything on any human being before. Then say, who revealed the book that was revealed unto Prophet Musa? In it there is light, guidance to mankind. Yet you would make it as qaratis. You would make it as just written things that you would reveal and conceal many and most of it. And you were taught what you had not known, not you and your ancestors. Then say, Allah, then let them in their controversy just take as mere play. For this book, we had revealed it in blessing. It is confirming what was revealed in the past to warn al-Qura, Mecca, and the cities around it. And those that would believe in the hereafter, they would believe in it. And they would be preserving their prayer. And there is no transgression far worse than claiming lies upon the Lord Almighty Allah, or claiming that they had a revelation when no revelation was sent unto them. And who would say, I will send down as what Allah had sent down. And if you were to see the transgressors as they would be drowning in death, with the angels reaching out their hands to them, taking their souls away. Today, you will be accountable and you will be punished. The punishment of humiliation for what you had claimed upon Allah Almighty of all the lies or the things that had opposed truth, and you were arrogant in believing in the words of the Lord Almighty. And today you come to us as separate individuals, the way that we had created you the first time, and you had left all the privileges that you had given to, that was given to you, you left it behind your backs. And today, we do not see the intercessors that you had claimed amongst you, and you had associated them in partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Today, they're disconnected from you. And all that you had claimed is now away from you. For the Lord Almighty is the one to split the seed and split in Nawa. In Nawa is basically the seed for a date. He would bring life from the dead and bring death or the dead from life. That is Allah. How do you debate and disregard the truth? He is the one that splits the morning and brings it to the horizon, basically, and makes the night as a place of tranquility. The sun and the moon are in complete full orbit and circulation. That is the system, or that is the evaluation or the system or the paradigm that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is Al-Aziz, the one that is not in need and that is self-efficient and also the most knowledgeable. And He is the one that made the stars to find guidance in the midst of the darkness of the land and sea. We had given you the details and intrinsic ayat, or detailed ayat, basically, for those that want to learn. He had created you from one soul, فَمُسْتَقَرٌ وَمُسْتَوْدَعٌ, to find in it tranquility, stability, and the resources. We had given you the detailed ayat for those that want to understand. Now here's one thing. When you look at these ayat, Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam was here, of course, debating all of those that had objected to Tawheed. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us about the legacy. And then furthermore, it tells us how in the same order that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had proven, that Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam had proven revelation, he basically comes to tell us in the same way. It basically gives us a certain structure in that debate, improving the evidence about the wahi, and that the Quran was actually inspiration from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what does it do? It basically starts refuting those that would deny the revelation. It basically then would lay out what the opponents had claimed, that they would deny Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He had revealed anything to any human being. And then the Quran would say, well, you know what? This is basically refusing the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because here are the great things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had created, and this is what you're not capable of doing, or even nature itself actually doing. So there's that argument with strategy, telling us here's that moral exposure, showing them the inconsistency in how they handled their scripture. How did they handle their scripture? Well, they were inconsistent. They basically recognized that there was nur and there was guidance within their scripture, but the way they handled their scripture is they basically just considered some of it, and the rest, they basically had hidden it because they didn't want the truth to reveal and expose how they were inconsistent with the way that they related to truth. So the Quran comes in to say, well, you had already seen the truth. If you didn't even when you had the scripture in your hands, you weren't committed to it. In other words, it's not strange in how you would relate to the Quran, to the scripture, and you still wanted to deny the truth within it, because even your own scripture, you were not committed to it. So it's not strange to see you basically accusing the Quran of not having light and not having guidance, because even when you had believed in your own scripture containing guidance, you didn't stay committed to that either. So that's why the Quran described it as, well, the Quran describes the Quran itself. Well, here's the Quran. It's Mubarak. It basically affirms everything that you had before. And it also comes with the same warning, the warning about Yawm al-Qiyamah. Warning whether the people of Mecca or even the people around it. And at the end, there's that faith that basically is highlighted right there and says, well, the ones that really believe in al-Akhirah and those that would really be in that commitment, whether commitment throughout their day, they would preserve their prayer, or whether we're speaking about that commitment to faith itself, then in that situation, that's letting us see those that lived in contrast of lacking commitment compared to those that lived the commitment. See, those that did not believe in or believed in the revelation, but then they weren't committed to it, compared to those that really believed in al-Akhirah and were committed to their prayers, and therefore laying it out as, well, those that would really be really committed to faith and committed to the scripture, compared to those that lived in discrepancy with what they believed in and what they put on ground. And that the main reason is not knowing the truth, but it's in embracing it and not letting their arrogance basically obstruct them from applying truth. So therefore, when you look at the ayah, وَمَنْ أَظْلُمْ مَنِ افْتَرَى عَلَى اللَّهِ كَذِبًا, it's basically a direct attack on those that would claim certain things that it doesn't have any evidence they will claim, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, well, you know what? The discrepancy is all too clear that you know the truth. And even if you were to know the truth, it's just the arrogance that's blocking you from applying and embracing the truth. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then basically describes how the end, the consequence right there is that when the angels would basically seize them and bring them to death, and how the punishment would be. So this isn't just talking about how they would live their life in that commitment, but would also talk about the trajectory. What is this going to lead to? And letting them get exposed of what would be the consequence of all of this, and therefore exposing the fake relationship between them and the scripture, and between what they would claim about themselves and being committed and all of that. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically then telling them, well, that moment that they would find themselves basically face to reality, when the malaika would be there during their death, then there's nowhere to run away. And therefore, they would basically find themselves, you've got a historical argument telling them, you've got the evidence right there. You also have this point that you would realize that logic that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had created in different things, in the different things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had created, whether we're speaking about right there in al-hab, in al-nawa, in al-hay, in al-mayyit, how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala works his miracles and controls the system. Now you would have this logical this logical argument showing you that there's no way that you can deny Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's work, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's force, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power, and then exposing their ethical contrast, and how they were not committed compared to the Muslims that were committed, and also comparing the same thing, the mockery that they would hold against the religion, that don't let that be something that would take away your confidence from recognizing faith. Just because they were using all these satires or mockery against the religion, that doesn't necessarily mean that they had their confidence, or they had the upper hand in speaking about truth. That many times is a method used by those that lack akhlaq and really connect to arrogance. It's that they do not want to submit to truth because their arrogance is blocking them and not necessarily the argument. So this is extremely important to see, but inshallah, tomorrow, we're actually going to go in more details in regards to وَمَا قَدَرُ اللَّهَ حَقَّ قَدْرِهِ. How do we understand these ayat in the lens of other ayat that use the same type of language? وَمَا قَدَرُ اللَّهَ حَقَّ قَدْرِهِ. What does it actually take us to? Is it possible that we can learn qadar Allah? What does it mean, qadar Allah? Is this talking about qada or qadar? No. So what is haqq qadr Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? What does it mean? How do we actually, as Muslims, certainly the disbelievers, they have their stance and their deviation, but how, as a Muslim, how do I live up to embracing qadar Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the lens of these ayat? That's what we're going to talk about tomorrow, because there's so many details. So I just gave you a little bit of, kind of like, like a sekba, kind of like just a touch of it. Okay. And inshallah, if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Let's see what we have here. We had Noura at one point. Now she's gone. Okay. Khasatullah, Rishma, Umayya, Naveed, Matina. MashaAllah, I'm very proud of you. Very committed, inshallah. Jarai and Amri, mashallah. Rabbi yahfadku jami'an. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, inshallah. Questions? Go ahead. Ustaz Umayya, go ahead, dear.
Yeah, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Yeah, for some clarification, please, about Rubayya, when she talked to the Prophet ﷺ about to get rid of the qasas, and he said, and it said, فأحال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم على قوله وكتبنا عليهم فيها أن النفس بالنفس فأحال. Then he said, ومع ذلك فحكم بها وأحال عليها. What does it mean, أحال عليها, please?
So the Prophet ﷺ, when you say ahala alayha, actually means that he was showing her. He was showing her that, look, this is a scripture. This isn't a personal thing. There's nothing that we can object if this is something within the scripture. In other words, he was teaching her the method of how we derive rulings. We go back to the scripture.
Yeah,
right?
But he accept adiyah?
Yes, no, they accepted, the family.
The family accept diyah, but he agreed if there is a nas.
Yes, he agreed. Yes, he agreed.
Even there is a nas in Quran, al-aynu bil-ayn was-sin was-sin.
Absolutely. So what is that? That's how we would basically understand that the Prophet ﷺ could also, in Shari'at al-Islam, could also abrogate, that it doesn't have to be in al-Qasas, but it could also add to it something that the Shari'at al-Islam had either added or had made from al-am to al-khas, had it made something particular, or had made something as to probably giving more details.
So al-aynu bil-ayn was-sin was-sin is for Shari'at Bani Israel.
Shari'at Bani Israel, and of course, can we take that as an inspiration? Yes, according to some scholars. Other scholars, they basically said, well, Shari'at Muhammad ibn Abdullah can come in and actually put either take that as the evidence to prove it, according to some scholars, and or Shari'at Muhammad ibn Abdullah can make something as mansukh, completely abrogated, or can make a specification, in other words, from am to khas to making a specification, or can even make from something being mutlaq to muqayyad, from something being a general thing to making it as a something that is within a certain or a specific moment or specific element, or specifying it in a certain way. In other words, making it exclusive to a certain case or so forth.
So when it says وليس في كتاب الله تعالى نص على القصاص في السن, this is only in Shari'at Bani Israel, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay. For that he go to the الدية.
الدية, yes.
Okay. جزاك الله خير.
By the way, there is another narration in regards to إِنَّ مِنْ عِبَادِ اللَّهِ مَنْ لَوْ أَقْسَمَ عَلَى اللَّهِ لَأَبَرَّهُ, that it is for Anas ibn al-Nadr. Who's Anas ibn al-Nadr? Anas ibn al-Nadr was a Sahabi. He didn't participate in the battle of Badr, and that was a regret that he always regret. But he participated in the Battle of Uhud and was actually killed in the Battle of Uhud. So 3-year hijrah. And Anas ibn al-Nadr was that Sahabi. By the way, she would actually be Anas ibn Malik's aunt. Am I right? Rubayya. Let's see. But there's another proof. We have an incident of a person who did something to the eyes of a person who was actually a close person to Rasulullah. So, I'm just here giving you the summary for the debate, because I don't want to make this into an usul al-fiqh class, okay? Just wanted you to kind of see some portion of that debate and not necessarily all the debate, okay? Because this is a tafseer class and not an usul al-fiqh.